She bought a tiny house for just $1. Everyone laughed and insisted she had made a huge mistake, but when the neighbors stepped inside, they were left speechless. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which country you're watching from. Lily had lived most of her life in places that never truly belonged to her. She was a woman in her late 30s, worn by years of labor and disappointment. Yet her eyes still held a quiet flame that refused to die out. Her face bore fine lines that deepened whenever she smiled, which happened rarely these days. The world seemed determined to remind her that she was poor, that she had no right to expect more than the bare minimum to survive. But even beneath layers of exhaustion, the spark of determination flickered with surprising resilience. Her clothes were always simple, always clean, though the fabric had long since faded. She walked with shoulders slightly hunched, not from defeat, but from habit, as if she had learned to take up little space in a world that barely noticed her existence. Her childhood had been a parade of temporary shelters and unfamiliar ceilings. Her parents, hard-working but perpetually underpaid, shifted from one rental place to another like nomads, never able to escape the cycle of overdue bills and hostile landlords. Lily remembered, even as a little girl, lying awake in the dark while her mother whispered with her father about how they would scrape together rent for the next week. She remembered the morning when they woke to find their furniture dragged outside because they had fallen behind on payments again. Shame had a way of lodging itself deeply into young hearts, and in Lily's heart it created an ache that never fully healed. A home, to her, became not just a structure, but a symbol of everything she had been denied: stability, dignity, safety. Adulthood brought no miracles. By the time she turned 18, she was already working multiple jobs just to remain afloat. She cleaned office buildings before sunrise, then hurried to a diner where she served people who never looked her in the eye. And sometimes, if luck allowed, she earned a few extra dollars by taking care of elderly neighbors in the evenings. Her work was invisible, much like she often felt herself. She moved through life swiftly and quietly, as if she were afraid that making noise might draw unwanted attention to how fragile her circumstances truly were. Relationships were a luxury she could never afford. It was hard to let someone into your life when that life consisted of peeling wallpaper and suitcases that were never fully unpacked. Love required a home, a real home, where two people could build something together, and she, no matter how she tried, had never managed to possess such a place. Instead, she endured short-term rentals and shared rooms, always aware that the roof above her head belonged to someone else, could be taken away by someone else, and that she was tolerated only as long as her payments were on time. Her current living arrangement was typical of what her life had allowed: a cramped, decaying room in an old boarding house with a bed that creaked loudly every time she shifted her weight. Her few belongings were pressed against each other in the corner, stacked on top of one another because there simply wasn't enough room to spread them out. The kitchen and bathroom were shared by too many people who had too little respect for cleanliness. Privacy was a myth. Peace was rare. And yet, whenever she returned from work, she closed the thin, poorly insulated door behind her and told herself she was lucky to have anything at all. But every night before she fell asleep, she imagined something different. The dreams would come softly, as if afraid to disturb her exhaustion. She pictured a small place filled only with the things she loved. A window with curtains she chose herself. A bookshelf holding the few novels she cherished. A pot of flowers she could water each morning. A front door that locked only from the inside, because no one but her had the right to open it. She didn't wish for a mansion or wealth. She wished for belonging. That alone felt like an impossible wish. The idea that a home could be hers someday hovered like a distant star, visible but forever out of reach. She didn't even let herself talk about it aloud. People like her were expected to remain satisfied with what little they had. Whenever she walked past a real estate office, she might linger for a second, just long enough to look at glossy posters showing smiling families and spacious homes. Then she would turn away before the ache in her chest grew too sharp. Then, one afternoon, after a long shift wiping tables and stacking dishes in the diner, she sat outside on a bench with a plastic cup of cheap coffee. She felt drained, shoulders heavy, body aching in familiar ways. Someone had left a newspaper on the bench beside her, folded in half, the edges smudged. Normally, she wouldn't bother reading it, but she was too tired to move right away, so she pulled it onto her lap and let her eyes wander across the page. An advertisement caught her attention only because the title seemed so absurd. Tiny house for sale, only $1. At first, she thought it was a joke. A misprint, maybe. She blinked, leaned closer, and read the small print beneath the bold headline. The house was real, though described as extremely small and needed minor upkeep. It was located on the outskirts of the city. The listing sounded strange, almost desperate, but every word was official. It was unmistakably for sale, and it cost exactly $1. Her heart fluttered unexpectedly. She read it again, a third time. She checked the address twice, scanned the contact details, waiting for the trick to reveal itself. $1. It didn't make sense. Nothing in her life had ever been that simple. $1 could barely buy a loaf of bread, let alone a house. She shook her head slightly, forcing down the foolish hope rising inside her chest. People didn't give away real homes. There had to be more to the story. Something hidden. Something wrong. And yet, what if? The thought crept into her mind quietly, refusing to leave. What if this was her one chance? She felt ridiculous even considering it. She imagined telling anyone about it. They would laugh in her face, call her naive, remind her that poor women didn't just stumble into opportunities like that. But she had spent so many years telling herself no, shutting down her own hopes before the world could, that she suddenly felt tired of surrendering without a fight. The idea remained in her mind for days. She carried the torn newspaper clipping in her bag, pulling it out during breaks as if checking to make sure the words hadn't changed. She researched the address on her phone, trying to find clues. She barely slept as her imagination ran wild, building tiny floor plans and possible futures. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the worst thing that could happen was simply hearing no. She had heard worse in her life already. So, one morning, before she could convince herself otherwise, she gathered her courage, dialed the number on the advertisement, and scheduled a time to visit. Her voice trembled slightly as she confirmed the appointment, but once she ended the call, she felt something shift inside her. It was a sensation she hadn't felt in years. Something warm. Something like expectation. Of course, when people found out she was going to look at a house that cost $1, their laughter was immediate. Some suggested it was a storage shed. Others joked that maybe it was a doghouse. One coworker asked if she planned to live inside a cardboard box next. Their amusement stung, but Lily did her best to ignore it. She had learned long ago that if she waited for others to believe in her dreams, she would die before they ever came true. Later that week, she stood before the address listed in the advertisement. The house was indeed tiny, barely wider than a single car. Its paint was peeling, the windows dusty. There was a loneliness about it, like a forgotten relic that had been left to suffer the weather and time. It looked fragile, unimpressive, and exactly the sort of place people would laugh at. Yet, despite everything it wasn't, it represented something precious, possibility. She stared at it for a long moment, imagining herself opening the front door each day, stepping into a space that belonged only to her. Even if it was small. Even if others never understood. She felt something in her heart tighten with longing. She didn't know yet that the house held secrets far beyond what anyone could have guessed. She couldn't imagine that behind these worn walls lay a hidden world waiting to unfold. All she knew was that she was standing at the edge of a decision that could change her entire life. She drew a breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped forward. In that instant, a dream that she barely allowed herself to believe began to take shape, rooted in hope and a single dollar. And though she had no idea what awaited her inside that strange little house, Lily felt, perhaps for the first time in her life, that destiny was finally ready to open a door for her. The day she returned to the tiny house felt almost unreal, as if her feet had carried her into someone else's life. The sky was heavy with low gray clouds, and a slight drizzle misted the air, making the neglected structure before her look even smaller, more fragile. Yet Lily's heart beat fast with a quiet determination that refused to be drowned by doubt or weather. She stood there for a moment, gripping the strap of her worn purse, reminding herself that she had made it this far, further than anyone believed she could. She took in every imperfect detail. The cracked concrete steps, the front door that seemed too narrow for a grown person, the faded address numbers crookedly nailed to the frame. This was the place she intended to call home. She met with a representative from the agency managing the sale, a brisk, expressionless woman who treated the entire process as trivial paperwork, something barely worth the effort. There were no smiles, no congratulations, no warmth of any kind, only the cold reality of signatures, initials, and legal clauses. The woman set the documents down on a folding table inside a tiny office that smelled of stale coffee and dust. Lily's hands hovered uncertainly over the contract at first, afraid that something would stop her at the last moment. But as soon as the pen touched paper, she felt a jolt of adrenaline rush through her, and her signature flowed confidently across the page. Against all expectations, her own and others, the house was hers. The dollar she handed over seemed absurd when placed next to the significance of the purchase. It was a single coin, slightly tarnished, resting briefly in the representative's palm before disappearing into a drawer. It was the smallest financial transaction of Lily's life, and yet the most monumental. When the final form was stamped and notarized, a key was placed in her hand, a plain, scratched key that hardly looked capable of unlocking a future. She stared at it for a long moment, feeling its weight, realizing she was feeling something more than just metal pressing into her skin. It was possibility. It was ownership. For the first time in her life, she didn't owe rent, she didn't fear eviction, she didn't tremble at the thought of a knock on the door in the middle of the night. She had something that belonged to her, even if it was tiny, even if it was mocked. It was hers. Stepping into the house for the first time as its owner should have been triumphant, but instead the interior welcomed her with an almost painful starkness. There was one room, just one, with a small alcove attempting to serve as a kitchen. The floorboards were scuffed and discolored, as if decades of footsteps had passed before hers. The walls were plain, chipped in places, weary from neglect. A single window let in a thin, watery light that barely reached the corners of the space. It was as if the house held its breath, uncertain whether it was ready to be lived in again. She walked slowly, carefully, as though afraid of breaking the fragile thing fate had finally placed in her hands. She placed her palm against the cool wall and stood silently for a moment. This wasn't much. To anyone else, it was almost nothing. But to her, this small, tired room was a victory larger than any wealth she had ever known. The world outside, however, refused to see it that way. News of the purchase spread quickly, as gossip often does. The neighbors watched from their porches and windows with smirks and lowered voices. People pointed as she passed, whispering comments they didn't bother to hide. They found it hilarious that a grown woman would willingly buy something so tiny, so laughable, so beneath their idea of comfort. Some asked where she planned to sleep, curled up like a cat in the middle of the floor. Others joked that the house would blow over in a strong wind and she'd have to chase it down the street. To them, her new home was nothing more than a punchline. Their amusement was sharp and careless. They never considered how deeply their words might cut someone whose life had already been carved from wounds. But Lily remained outwardly calm, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She had endured worse humiliation throughout the years. If laughter was the price of hope, she would endure it gladly. The move happened quietly, without fanfare, without anyone offering help. She made several trips back and forth with her few possessions, a single suitcase of clothing, a small box of dishes, a couple of folded blankets, and a small framed photograph of her mother smiling during better times. She carried each item up the steps and into the house, placing them gently into their new home. The space swallowed so little of her belongings that it almost looked unchanged. It might be tiny, but for once she had more than enough room. Inside her old boarding house, no one said goodbye. No one even noticed she was gone. She left her key on the chipped counter near the door and walked out without looking back. The air outside felt different on her skin, lighter, cleaner, almost celebratory. She liked to think that the universe had been waiting quietly for this moment, too. As she settled into the small house, practical challenges became immediately clear. The roof leaked slightly when the rain came. The old pipes groaned each time she washed her hands. The stove simmered weakly, protesting against even the simplest cooking task. But none of those problems frightened her the way the thought of failure once did. She had survived far greater discomforts, and now she worked not for a landlord's gain, but for her own future. Every nail she hammered, every corner she swept, every window she wiped clean felt like a declaration. I belong here. Still, the outside world did not stop mocking her. People still paused just to take a good look at the dollar house, shaking their heads with exaggerated pity. She overheard comments thrown casually into the air, remarks that assumed she was too foolish to understand their implications. They couldn't imagine that the tiny structure contained more than what their eyes saw. They had already judged it worthless, and by extension they judged her the same. Yet, despite their cruelty, Lily began to feel something new blooming inside her, something powerful and surprising. Pride. It was faint at first, like a cautious seed trying to push through hard soil. Every time she placed her key into the lock, every time she crossed the threshold, the seed grew a little more. Yes, the house was small. Yes, the world laughed. But the door closed behind her by her own hand, not anyone else's. These walls, thin though they might be, held only her story now. In the quiet nights, sleep found her more gently than before. She would lie awake sometimes, listening to the soft creaks of the house settling in the darkness, and imagine what secrets such a peculiar little place might be hiding. Houses older than this, she had heard, sometimes contained forgotten surprises, hidden cubbies, unseen compartments, strange design details left behind by creative builders or eccentric owners. With each passing day, her curiosity strengthened. There were small, almost imperceptible signs that the house was not quite as ordinary as it looked. A seam along the wall that didn't match the construction. A strange, hollow sound when she tapped certain sections of the floor. Discreet metal latches tucked into corners that seemed unnecessary. At first, she dismissed them, too focused on settling in to dwell on oddities, but her mind held on to them quietly, storing them away like puzzle pieces waiting to be arranged. Her exhaustion made the days blur together, but slowly she began establishing a routine. Wake early, work hard, come home to her own four walls, sort through thoughts, make small improvements where she could. It wasn't glamorous, but it was progress. And unlike anything she'd known before, her progress stayed with her. It couldn't be taken away by a notice slipped under the door or a landlord banging angrily on the wall at midnight. Still, it wasn't easy to ignore the eyes that followed her everywhere. Some neighbors would pause outside her house, pretending to check their phones or admire their lawns while actually peering shamelessly toward her windows. If she stepped outside to sweep the walkway or bring in groceries, the gossiping would intensify. They couldn't fathom that anyone could willingly choose such a small space. They expected failure. They expected that she would eventually surrender to embarrassment and leave. But Lily would not leave, not only because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had finally found something worth fighting for. Something for herself, for the girl long ago who had slept in strangers' homes and prayed for solidity. Something for the woman who had bled her energy into an unforgiving world without ever receiving anything back. This house might have been built small, but inside her heart it was enormous. She didn't yet know that the house had depths far beyond what anyone could imagine. She didn't yet know that it would transform into something magnificent, defying every assumption, every cruel joke. She didn't know that the laughter would one day be replaced by awe. All she knew was that she had taken the first bold step into a life where the ground beneath her feet was, at last, her own. And as she drifted into sleep one night, listening to the rhythmic tapping of rain against the roof, a strange feeling washed over her, as if the house, with all its mysteries, was waiting for her to look closer. The sense of hidden space, of unfound wonders, pulsed softly through the walls. Something was there, tucked beneath the surface of the ordinary. The mockery of the world couldn't drown out the truth slowly awakening within these walls. This tiny place was not done revealing itself. The story of the house, and of Lily, was only just beginning. The first nights in the tiny house were strangely silent. Lily had spent so many years surrounded by the unpredictable chaos of shared living spaces that the quiet felt unsettling, almost eerie. In the boarding house she'd just left behind, there were always footsteps above her, shouting through walls, arguments in the hallway, doors slamming late into the night. Here, the only sounds were the occasional groan of old wood adjusting to temperature changes and the wind brushing gently against the siding. The peace should have been comforting, but at first it only amplified her thoughts, forcing her to confront every doubt she had tried so hard to ignore. Each morning she woke early, the room still wrapped in soft darkness, and slipped outside into a world that took little notice of her. Her work routine didn't change. She still rushed from job to job, cleaning floors that others dirtied, serving meals to people who barely acknowledged her presence. But every evening, she returned to something that was finally her own. Turning the key in the lock gave her a small jolt of pride every single time. The day could have been exhausting or cruel, but the house would be there waiting, silent and loyal. Yet, once she closed the door behind her, reality reminded her that owning a home, even a tiny, battered one, came with responsibilities she wasn't accustomed to. The house was old and required constant attention. The first leak she discovered was above the corner of the kitchen when a steady drip woke her late at night, tapping rhythmically into a mixing bowl she had placed beneath it. The heater sputtered more than it warmed, and every time she turned the faucet, she held her breath, praying the pipes would hold. She found herself spending what little money she had on basic repairs, tubes of sealant, cheap insulating strips, light bulbs to replace those that flickered ominously. These inconveniences might have seemed small to someone else, but to Lily, who had spent every dollar with the precision of someone terrified of losing everything, they were heavy burdens. Still, with each small fix, she felt a new sense of independence. The house was improving because of her hands, not someone else's. Her neighbors didn't disappear, nor did their stares or whispered mockery. Some even slowed their cars as they drove past, as if observing a strange roadside attraction. Their smirks were a constant reminder of the narrative they had written for her. The foolish woman who bought a house too small to live in. They expected her to crack under the pressure, to pack up her belongings and admit defeat. But she walked past them with steady eyes, never giving them the satisfaction of seeing wounds they inflicted. On weekends, she tried to make the tiny space truly livable, but progress was painfully slow. She rearranged furniture constantly, searching for any configuration that might give her more breathing room. The single room seemed to shrink with each attempt. A small dresser made the space feel tight. A chair became a hindrance. Even the mattress, pushed neatly against the wall, looked too large. Some nights she sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the walls and wondering if she had simply traded one form of hardship for another. Yet, despite all the struggles, she began to notice the house holding something back, like a secret waiting beneath the surface of ordinary reality. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, she dropped her keys near the corner of the room. When she knelt to pick them up, her hand brushed what felt like a metallic edge beneath a loose board. Curious, she pressed gently and felt the plank shift slightly. Her heart thudded as she pried it up just enough to reveal a narrow, hollow space below. It was empty, just a dark pocket of air, but its existence puzzled her. Why build a hidden space so small and precise if not for a purpose? Afterward, she tapped lightly along the floorboards and walls, listening closely to the difference in sound. Certain patches echoed strangely, suggesting empty areas behind them. The seams between some boards were too intentional, too strategic to be mere aging or wear. She noticed a tiny latch near the base of the wall, partially concealed under a layer of chipped paint. When she tugged it, it barely moved, locked or jammed by time. The discovery sent a thrill through her exhaustion. It was the first hint that the house might not be what everyone assumed it to be. But the days continued blending together, filled with scraping, washing, mending, and collapsing into bed with sore muscles and weary eyes. She sometimes lay awake questioning whether she was romanticizing the house's oddities to distract from her hardships. What if all of these quirks were just signs of poor craftsmanship and neglect? What if her hopes were just fantasies she clung to in order to endure the reality of owning a home that seemed too small to contain a future. At the same time, an instinct deep within whispered that this house was deliberately designed, crafted with intention that she had only begun to uncover. Every time she noticed another unusual feature, that instinct grew louder. There were seams that led nowhere, magnetic catches embedded behind what looked like ordinary panels, little clicks beneath her fingertips when she pressed along edges of certain walls. She began to realize that the house's smallness might be a carefully crafted illusion. Still, she kept these suspicions to herself. The last thing she wanted was to give anyone more reasons to ridicule her. She was already the subject of too much unwanted attention. When people asked how things were going, she answered simply, "Fine." That one word protected her heart from their judgment and guarded the fragile hope beginning to bloom inside her. At work, she noticed a shift in her own posture. She stood a little taller even on the days when fatigue dragged at her limbs. The knowledge that she would return to a place that belonged to her altered her perception of everything else. The bus rides felt a little less suffocating. The long hours felt more bearable. She had a reason to keep pushing forward. One evening, as she scrubbed grime from the walls in preparation for repainting them, her cloth snagged on the faint outline of something like a panel. She leaned closer, brushing away dust, revealing a subtle rectangular shape hidden behind layers of faded paint. It was almost invisible unless someone looked closely, but now that she had seen it, she couldn't unsee it. Her pulse quickened. She pressed along the edges. The panel did not budge, but she could feel the promise of movement beneath it. That night, she lay in bed, fully awake, staring at the ceiling. The excitement she tried to suppress began pulsing steadily through her veins. The small, shabby home she had purchased for $1 was changing. Not physically, not yet. But her understanding of it was shifting, reshaping the very boundaries of what she believed possible. The house sat quietly around her, holding its breath in the dark just as she did. In the stillness, she felt something she hadn't dared believe in for years: anticipation. It was as though the house had been waiting for someone who wouldn't dismiss it as a joke, someone who would look deeper instead of laughing at the exterior. It seemed to sense that its new owner was ready to begin peeling back the layers. And Lily knew, with a certainty that surprised even her, that she was ready. The world outside could continue to ridicule her. They could roll their eyes and shake their heads, confident in their superiority. But they had never stepped inside her home. They had never pressed their fingers along the walls and felt the heartbeat of hidden craftsmanship beneath the paint. She inhaled slowly, a quiet smile tugging at her lips in the dark. They thought she had bought a box. They had no idea what she was about to uncover. The tiny house, the one everyone mocked, was waiting to show her that small was only the beginning. The days that followed were filled with a quiet electricity, a tension that hummed beneath the everyday routine like a secret chord waiting to be struck. Lily found herself studying every inch of the house with newfound intent. What had once seemed merely worn and cramped now appeared suspiciously intricate. Where others saw decay, she sensed design. Her exhaustion from work remained, but curiosity made her movements lighter, her mind sharper. Even when she dragged her feet home after a 14-hour shift, she would drop her bag by the door and kneel down to inspect a seam in the floor, a joint in the wall, or a narrow groove in the ceiling. The tiny house no longer felt entirely still. It felt alive. One evening, she carried a small flashlight and gently pressed into the rectangular shape she had noticed earlier. Her fingers moved along the outline, feeling the faint give beneath a layer of paint. She pushed harder. Something clicked, a soft, mechanical sound that startled her more than it should have. The panel released slightly from the wall. Her pulse thundered in her chest as she wedged her fingertips into the gap and carefully pulled. The panel swung open like a narrow door, revealing a dark cavity beyond. For a moment, she could only stare. This was impossible. There was no reason for space to exist behind that wall, not if the house were as tiny as the outside suggested. She lifted her flashlight and aimed it into the opening. A small passage extended inward, barely wide enough for her to crawl through. She hesitated, unsure whether she should celebrate or run away, but the hesitation lasted only a breath before curiosity. That quiet, insistent force pushed her forward. She slipped inside on her knees, the beam of her flashlight trembling slightly as she moved. Dust rose in the air, shimmering like grains of silver. The passage led downward at a gentle slope, the walls lined with wooden beams that appeared unexpectedly sturdy and well-preserved. After a few feet, the narrow tunnel widened into a compact but proper room. It was larger than the entire visible house above. Lily froze where she knelt, breath caught in her throat. How could this exist? How could such a space hide beneath a single-room structure so small it almost looked like an accessory shed? She took in the room slowly, letting the light unveil its secrets. The floor was smooth, the walls remarkably clean. Shelves were built into the sides, empty but well-crafted. In one corner, a folded structure caught her attention. She touched it gingerly and felt metal beneath the layer of dust. She tugged gently, and the object unfolded into a small desk attached with clever hinges that allowed it to retract into the wall. She stared at it, wide-eyed, marveling at how something so functional could so easily disguise itself. A surge of disbelief crashed over her. All those mocking voices from the street above, if only they could see what she was seeing now. She forced herself to continue exploring, crawling further into the hidden room. Her beam landed on another seam in the wall, another panel. She pressed it, and it slid aside smoothly, revealing a staircase tucked tightly inside. A staircase. In a house that, by all measure of logic, should never have allowed for such a thing. The stairs were narrow and steep, but sturdy. Without allowing fear to pull her back, she climbed. As she ascended, the space opened into yet another room, this one wider, taller, and with a small window set high in the wall. When she approached the window, she realized it faced the rear of the lot, angled cleverly in such a way that anyone outside would have mistaken it for part of a neighboring property, or perhaps not noticed it at all. The window framed a sliver of sky and treetops that she had never been able to see from the ground. The air here was fresher. The walls were crafted from a warm wood that caught the light softly. Built-in drawers lined one wall, their handles flush and nearly invisible. She opened one at random, finding it empty, but marveling at the precision of the engineering. It was not the work of someone who slapped together a structure to barely function. It was beauty wrapped in utility, a hidden treasure disguised as nothing. It dawned on her then that this house had been designed by someone brilliant, someone who believed that space was not a matter of size, but ingenuity, someone who cared deeply about transforming limitations into advantages. She sat down on the floor of the upper hidden room, the flashlight resting on her knee, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The world above, the laughter, the condescension, the quick judgments, felt distant, almost imaginary. Down here, truth existed. Down here, she was more than what they thought of her. She had made a decision that everyone mocked, and that decision had led her into wonder. In that moment, she let herself imagine the future again. What else could be hidden within these walls? Could there be a kitchen more functional than the small alcove upstairs? A place for a bed that wouldn't make the house feel cramped, room for guests, space to store belongings she had never dared to own. For the first time, she dared to feel the full weight of the house's promise. This home was more than she had ever hoped for. It was a chance to build a life not defined by scarcity. She spent the next days continuing her exploration. Every spare minute was poured into examining the house's skeleton with a fascination that bordered on obsession. She discovered another hidden ladder that folded seamlessly into the ceiling of the new room, and, above that, a loft space that could easily become a sleeping area. The loft had angled walls but enough headroom to move comfortably. Another panel in the corner led to a little nook perfect for reading or simply retreating from the world. It felt like the home was unfolding itself room by room, growing outward from the inside in a miraculous defiance of its tiny exterior. More panels revealed cleverly disguised compartments, underfloor storage deep enough to hide suitcases or seasonal clothes, a narrow pull-out pantry that made the original kitchen seem shamefully incomplete by comparison, even tiny cubbies for items she didn't yet own. There were hooks that slid out from the walls and retracted smoothly when not needed, rails to hang things that disappeared into clean wooden grooves, elegant wooden components crafted with meticulous detail. As she uncovered each new secret, she found herself laughing softly in disbelief, joy creeping into her expression more freely than it had in years. She had spent so long shrinking herself to fit whatever tiny space the world allowed her, that finding a place where the space itself expanded felt like a miracle made just for her. Her confidence bloomed and spread like warm sunlight in her chest. She carried herself differently around town, even when she overheard the same cruel jokes from the same thoughtless voices. If they only knew. Their mockery lost its sting, replaced by the private delight that she held knowledge far too precious to share with anyone who did not deserve it. At night, she would lie in her makeshift bed in the upper secret room rather than the plain one upstairs, watching the dim outside glow through the cleverly hidden window. Her eyes traced the angles of the wood, the soft curves of the built-in furniture, the astonishing craftsmanship that someone had poured into every inch of this place. She often wondered about the designer, the architect who dreamed this structure into existence, and why such brilliance had been dismissed and abandoned. She promised herself she would find answers. But first, she would continue uncovering every hidden inch. She would claim these spaces as her own, turning mystery into memory. Every discovery soothed a part of her heart that had been raw since childhood, the place where loss and homelessness had carved deep scars. One night, while adjusting one of the newly revealed sliding walls, she found a small engraved mark near the frame, the signature of the architect. It was simple, elegant, and full of pride. Her thumb brushed over the carved letters again and again, as though touching the name made the architect feel a little less forgotten. She whispered into the darkness, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, voice trembling with emotion she had held in silence for too long. Down in the hidden rooms, surrounded by brilliant work that had gone unseen by the world, Lily was no longer the woman others saw, the woman who bought a $1 excuse for a house. She was someone living in the heart of a secret masterpiece. Above her, the mocking world remained unchanged for now, but soon she knew everything would shift, because she was only at the beginning. The house had given her its first secrets, and many more waited in the walls, waiting for the right eyes to see them. She was ready to discover all of them. And when the time came, the world would no longer laugh. Each new discovery changed not only the house, but Lily herself. What once felt like a compromise now felt like a revelation unfolding in stages, a puzzle built to reward patience and imagination. After uncovering the hidden rooms and passageways, she spent her evenings inspecting every surface with quiet reverence. This home was no longer merely a shelter. It was a work of art disguised as simplicity, and the more she learned, the more she realized she had barely scratched the surface of what was possible within these walls. The first major transformation began in what she once thought was the only room. Now, knowing it was just a small part of the whole structure, she approached it with a different eye. The cramped kitchen alcove suddenly seemed like a temporary placeholder. One night, as she worked to clean and better understand the mechanics behind the sliding panels and folding furniture, she tugged on a horizontal beam near the ceiling. The beam shifted slightly, then smoothly descended like a drawbridge, unfolding into a second surface that connected with the existing counter. The transformation revealed a full countertop, sturdy and elegant, doubling the workspace in an instant. Beneath the counter, hidden latches released a long, slim pantry that glided outward on silent metal rails, presenting shelf after shelf of storage she never knew was there. She felt her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't just clever, it was beautiful. Every piece fit seamlessly back into place, as though the kitchen had been designed by someone obsessed with maximizing space without sacrificing comfort. When she ran her fingers along the wood grain, she felt the craftsmanship in every detail. This was no cheaply made experiment. One by one, new components revealed themselves, making the kitchen evolve from a cramped survival corner into a fully functional culinary space. She found compartments for cookware, a hidden drawer for utensils, and even a sliding block that extended into a small dining table. A slender cabinet door she assumed held nothing but a broom actually opened to reveal a slim refrigerator that hummed quietly to life once she tested it. Everything had been waiting, dormant until discovered and activated. Her eyes shone with wonder. The house kept offering moments like that, moments where she could only whisper to the empty air, as if thanking some unseen architect for believing that even small homes deserved luxury. The hidden rooms below had amazed her with their existence, but now she explored them more deeply, learning how each space was designed not just to exist, but to serve. The first hidden chamber she had discovered, the one she had crawled into so cautiously, held more than just shelves and fold-out furniture. Behind one sliding panel she found a compact bathroom, a real bathroom, with a shower that folded outward like a blooming steel flower. The basin slid out from beneath a panel that doubled as a mirror when it unfolded, and the toilet was seamlessly integrated into a structure that sealed shut when not in use. When everything was tucked away, the room looked like an ordinary storage space, but when opened, it revealed comfort she had not dared hope for. The day she first stepped into the shower, she cried quietly, letting hot water run down her face and shoulders as though it could wash away years of strain. She no longer had to share a bathroom with strangers. She no longer had to beg for decency or hurry through her ablutions out of fear that someone would bang on the door. Here, she was respected, by walls, by fixtures, by the thoughtful mind that had built this sanctuary. The bathroom felt like the ultimate proof that she had not merely escaped her past, she had arrived somewhere worthy. The discovery of the loft space above was equally transformative. Where others might see only an odd, wedge-shaped room, She saw haven. She placed her mattress beneath the angled ceiling and set up a soft reading light near the hidden window. The loft became her nighttime retreat, where she could gaze upward at the square of sky glowing faintly under moonlight. In the early dawn, sunbeams filtered through the narrow pane, brushing warm gold across the wooden ceiling, making her feel as though she woke inside a secret sunrise crafted just for her. Below the loft, additional compartments revealed themselves as she learned the language of the house. The slight indentation that meant a panel could be pressed, the hidden hinges that betrayed the outline of a new discovery. In one such space, she found what could only be described as a miniature greenhouse. The structure featured transparent panels angled to capture natural light through cleverly concealed exterior openings. She placed her first plant there, a small, leafy sprout she had bought with her tip money. Watching it settle into its new home, surrounded by the soft glow of sunlight filtered through the walls, gave her a sense of peace she had never known. The greenhouse filled her with dreams of more green, of fresh herbs for her cooking, of delicate flowers she could tend with care. It was as though the house was inviting her to nurture something beautiful, to grow life within its hidden walls just as she was growing herself. Every new feature she unlocked made the space feel bigger, impossibly bigger, until the upper world, the one that judged her, began to feel smaller by comparison. Her house no longer belonged to the category of tiny homes. It belonged to something else entirely. A structure where the limitations existed only if one chose not to explore deeper. The furniture, even when folded away, had elegance. The wood gleamed with rich tones, warm browns and honeyed golds, suggesting expensive materials. Every mechanism seemed built with both precision and affection, as though the maker cared about how the future owner would feel using it. Even the air inside felt different as she restored life to each forgotten room. The hidden architecture seemed eager to breathe again, as though the house recognized her presence and responded with gratitude by unveiling more wonders. In a rare moment of pause, she stood in the center of her reinvented home, turning slowly as she took in the transformation. Each space now flowed into the next, like the chambers of a heart designed to nurture dreams instead of pumping blood. Every door she opened revealed potential. Every corner she explored whispered possibility. She cleaned the surfaces until they gleamed, repaired tiny damages left by time, and brought in soft blankets, pillows, and small personal treasures to warm the spaces. As each room gained her touch, the house began to feel alive again. It was no longer forgotten. It was loved. Even the simplest actions became acts of triumph. Cooking breakfast on the cleverly revealed stove felt like a celebration. Setting her plate on a table that disappeared with a gentle push made her giddy. Washing dishes and running water that belonged to no landlord filled her with pride. She moved through rooms barefoot, feeling grounded in a space that finally welcomed her. For the first time in her life, she was not just surviving, she was living. Every night afterward, she walked through the hidden levels of her home as though rediscovering them anew, her hand gliding along smooth wood and polished metal. She marveled at how perfectly everything fit, how one woman's dream and one architect's genius had collided in a place most people viewed only with ridicule. Sometimes she wondered how those neighbors would react if they knew. She pictured their wide eyes, their stunned silence, their disbelief. She imagined the moment when their mockery would dissolve into awe, but she never indulged in bitterness. Instead, she felt a strange compassion for those who measured worth only by what they could see on the surface. They had never learned how to look deeper. She had. And because she looked deeper, she had uncovered not only a remarkable home, but the sense of dignity she had spent her entire life yearning for. The house, once dismissed as nothing more than a joke, had become her secret palace. A palace that was clever, warm, sustainable, and filled to the brim with potential. It was a testament to imagination. It was a statement against those who believed that luxury could exist only within the sprawling and the obvious. Here, in this miracle of wood and ingenuity, a woman who had been overlooked all her life found space to stretch her soul. The walls no longer felt close. The ceiling no longer pressed down. The world outside might still be cruel, but inside this house, she finally had everything she needed. And she sensed that the house had not yet revealed everything it had to offer. There were still panels she had not pressed, spaces she had not crawled into, mechanisms she had not activated. The mystery had not yet ended, and she could not wait for tomorrow. As the house blossomed within its unassuming walls, Lily's confidence grew with every step she took inside it. Her life had changed in ways so profound she could scarcely recount them without feeling overwhelmed. And yet, outside her sanctuary, nothing appeared different. The house's exterior remained just as the world perceived it: small, laughable, unimpressive. She still walked past her neighbors with a bowed head and quiet footsteps, still endured the same smirks and whispered jokes. But now, behind her silence, she held a secret too magnificent for their shallow imaginations to comprehend. They had no idea that beneath faded siding and chipped trim lay a carefully engineered miracle of design. However, secrets have a way of stirring curiosity in others. Over time, the neighbors began to notice subtle changes. They saw her carrying out boxes that seemed too large to come from such a tiny place. They saw packaging for high-quality appliances discarded near her bins, and assumed she must be hoarding them for a job, not understanding that everything was being installed inside her so-called shack. They saw her step outside in the evenings with a calm smile on her face, no longer hunched in self-protection. They noticed she returned home with groceries fit for cooking real meals rather than survival scraps. Something about her had undeniably shifted. And people hate not knowing. It began with small excuses. A neighbor passing by just happened to have misplaced a dog. Another claimed to be collecting signatures for some minor community petition. One knocked on her door to ask if she could spare a flashlight because his had broken. They asked to come inside to talk, to look for something they lost, to borrow time. Each request was framed as harmless, but their eyes shone with hunger, a need to see what she was hiding. Lily could sense the intention beneath their false friendliness, and though she was polite, she never moved aside from the doorway. She offered short answers and wished them a good day, gently closing the door against their probing gazes. Still, their fascination only grew. One evening, as she stepped outside to fetch a parcel left by the mail carrier, an elderly neighbor from across the street was standing quietly on her walkway. He had always kept to himself, never one to indulge in gossip. His hands trembled slightly as he leaned on his cane, and his curious eyes darted from the roof line to the narrow walls and back again. "Your lights," he murmured more to himself than to her. "They come from places where there shouldn't be rooms." Lily's heart skipped. So someone had finally noticed. She simply nodded, keeping her expression neutral. The old man looked at her intently, as if trying to solve a puzzle, but then he nodded back and slowly shuffled away without another word. She found his quiet curiosity far less intrusive than the hungry prying of others. Still, she realized she would need to be more careful. Despite her desire for privacy, something soon happened that she could not fully control. It began with an accident, the kind she could not have predicted. One afternoon, she opened a side window in the hidden upper room to air out the space. The design of the window was clever, camouflaged from the street unless someone looked at the perfect angle, and, unfortunately, that exact angle happened to be visible from the yard next door, where two women were tending a garden while loudly discussing local gossip. Their conversation froze. Their heads turned in unison. Their jaws hung open. They saw the window. They saw that it didn't belong. The house was supposed to have only one visible window, a tiny square facing the street, but this one was something completely different. Before Lily could close it, one of the women called out her name with exaggerated cheerfulness, begging to come over and catch up. But Lily wasn't fooled. She shut the hidden window quickly and retreated deeper into the home, her pulse racing. It was too late. The rumor was already growing. That evening, people gathered in the street in small clusters. Faces turned toward her house again and again. Fingers pointed. The whispering rose like wind around her when she stepped outside to bring in her trash bin. It didn't take long for the story to warp into something fantastic. Claims that she was living in a strange experimental home, or that she had somehow expanded the property illegally, or even that she was harboring something suspicious inside. It was only a matter of days before someone demanded to see inside. The turning point came unexpectedly when a group of neighbors, including the elderly man with the cane, approached her front door early one evening. She hesitated, gripping the knob tightly on her side of the door. Their knock echoed with insistence, but not aggression. She opened it just enough to see their expectant faces. Their expressions were painted with disbelief, envy, and something resembling desperation. They pleaded to look inside. Just a peek, they said. Just a moment. They wanted to see for themselves the truth behind the whispers. Lily's first instinct was to refuse, to protect her sanctuary, but another part of her, the part that remembered countless nights when she was belittled and dismissed, stirred. She didn't crave vindication, but she couldn't ignore the significance of this moment. These people had laughed at her. They had written her off before ever giving her a chance. Now they came seeking wonder from the person they once mocked. Slowly, cautiously, she opened the door wider and stepped aside. When they entered, silence struck the room like lightning. The first visible room, the one everyone assumed was all there was, had already changed dramatically. The expanded kitchen gleamed with warm countertops and state-of-the-art fixtures. Every line and surface whispered of quality. The small dining table slid out from the wall with the softest push, like magic invited to perform without applause. Nothing looked cheap or temporary. Not a single trace of the home they thought they knew remained. Their mouths hung open. One woman pressed a hand to her chest and staggered back in disbelief. Another reached out to touch the wood, running her fingers across the smooth grain as if needing to feel proof. The elderly man let out a soft chuckle, not mocking, but amazed. But that was only the beginning. Without waiting for permission, though she suspected they would not dare move without her lead, she walked toward a spotless wooden panel and pushed gently. The wall split seamlessly into an entryway, revealing a staircase leading down into the mysterious lower level. Gasps followed. Eyes widened. Someone stifled a cry of shock. She gestured for them to follow, her steps slow and deliberate. Downstairs, the hidden rooms dazzled them. The folding furnishings, the brilliant use of space, the ingenious architecture, every detail contradicted everything they believed about size and comfort. They murmured among themselves in awe, words like incredible and impossible falling from lips that once uttered ridicule. As they studied the rooms, Lily quietly stepped aside into the shadows, watching the shift occur in real time. The same people who once thought her beneath them now treated her home with reverence, as though they had stumbled upon a marvel constructed by the hands of geniuses. And then, while exploring the far wall near the concealed shelving, someone caught sight of something carved into the wood, the tiny engraving of the architect's signature, a revelation she had once traced with trembling fingertips. One of the neighbors read the name aloud in confusion. It was unfamiliar to them, yet the precision of the carving suggested pride and ownership. The elderly man drew closer, studying it with narrowed eyes. Then, slowly, tears welled in his gaze. "I knew him," he whispered into the quiet room. Lily turned sharply. The man leaned more heavily on his cane, as though memory had weight. He explained in a trembling voice that decades ago, an architect had lived in the city who dreamed of designing homes for those who could never afford them. Homes that didn't rely on size to feel luxurious, that used creativity instead of cost to inspire pride. But investors had mocked the idea. They claimed people wanted bigger, not smarter. Funding had dried up, and the architect had disappeared from public view, his dream crushed by the narrowness of others. This tiny house was one of his prototypes, the only one ever completed. Lily listened, heart pounding, as truth unveiled itself like the sliding walls she now knew so well. She was not simply living in a home. She was carrying forward the legacy of someone whose vision had been refused, just as she once was refused opportunities because of the narrow judgments of society. As the neighbors continued their tour, their awe palpable, something inside her shifted again. Her pride was no longer timid. It rose from deep within, sturdy and unyielding. When the group finally stepped outside into the late evening air, there was a silence among them that no one dared break. Their eyes flicked toward her with respect, genuine respect, for the first time. They no longer saw a foolish woman with a ridiculous house. They saw someone wise enough to recognize value where they themselves only saw mockery. They saw someone who had succeeded where they had failed. In the days that followed, others tried to visit. Requests for tours came steadily, growing into eager inquiries and offers. Her home became the subject of speculation, admiration, even reverence. And yet, she did not throw open her doors. She allowed only those who truly seemed to appreciate innovation and resilience, those who asked not out of greed, but curiosity and respect. She began researching the architect, pouring through archives and articles left to gather digital dust. She learned of his intentions, his heartbreak, his disappearance. She traced his dream with her fingertips and realized that, in choosing a $1 house when the world laughed, she had become the guardian of something precious and nearly lost. Lily understood now that her story and the architect's story were woven from the same thread, defiance against the narrow-minded belief that value must be measured in size or cost. She knew the world would eventually learn the truth of this house, and when they did, they would never laugh again. They would marvel, and the woman who once lived unheard in the shadows would become a testament to what beauty can grow from being underestimated. The home had changed her. But soon, she realized, she would change the world, starting from within the smallest house anyone had ever dismissed. The transformation that began inside the walls of the tiny house soon found a way to transform Lily herself. Days that once blurred into one another now felt distinct, vivid, and meaningful. She woke every morning with a purpose that stretched far beyond simply surviving another shift. The house had become her sanctuary, her story, and her calling. And though the world outside those walls had not fully changed, it could no longer diminish her. She carried her dignity in her spine now, in the steadier lift of her chin, in the quiet courage of her eyes. The home's brilliance had not merely impressed her neighbors, it had restored her sense of worth. With that restoration came possibility. Each morning, she lit the warm light inside the hidden rooms, letting brightness spill across wood and brushed metal. She brewed coffee in a kitchen that felt designed to honor her. She opened the discreet greenhouse panels to water her plants, breathing in the scent of growing green life. Every small act had become a celebration of the future she was now allowed to imagine. She was living a life she had once thought reserved only for others, those born into comfort, those lucky enough to be seen. But here she was, with a home more extraordinary than anything money had ever given the people who mocked her. Still, she knew she couldn't remain hidden forever. The world was already peering in, hungry for stories. Neighbors who once turned away from her now waved eagerly when she stepped outside. Some offered shy compliments about the marvel her home had turned out to be. Others apologized awkwardly for ever doubting her, apologies she accepted with quiet grace, offering forgiveness without granting intimacy. She understood that admiration and respect were not the same as friendship, but she appreciated the change nonetheless. There were days when letters arrived at her newly installed mailbox, envelopes bearing the names of architecture students, designers, journalists. They had heard rumors or seen clips captured on phones. They wanted interviews, photos, tours, articles. They wanted to learn from the miracle that she lived in. Some proposals came with offers of money, exhibitions, documentaries. Lily set most of them aside at first, overwhelmed by the idea of exposing her private life so publicly. She had spent so long trying not to be visible that the sudden attention felt like a bright light she wasn't yet ready to stand under. But the house had a story too, and it deserved to be known. She started small. An architecture magazine reached out with a gentle, respectful request. They wanted to honor the unknown architect behind the home and his dream for accessible, dignified housing. Their sincerity moved her. They didn't ask for flashy headlines or sensational claims. They cared about the legacy, not the gossip. So, after much thought, she agreed. She allowed one journalist to visit, a kind-eyed woman who listened more than she spoke, taking notes with the reverence of someone touching history. The article that followed changed everything. It told the story of a visionary architect whose work had been dismissed by those who lacked imagination. It chronicled the building of the prototype, the crushing end to the project, the disappearance of the man who dared to dream differently. And then it told the story of the woman who had believed enough to give a forgotten house a second chance. The photos of the interior, the multi-level rooms, hidden mechanisms, lush greenhouse corner, astonished readers. The article spread fast, picked up by outlets across the country, then across the world. Suddenly, people from cities she had never heard of knew her name. They admired her strength, her perseverance, her refusal to let humiliation define her path. Her story resonated with many who struggled as she once had. Renters, single parents, people overlooked and underestimated. Letters poured in from strangers who thanked her for giving them hope. They wrote of their own dreams to find a place where they could start over. She cried, reading some of those letters, recognizing her former self in their fearful hopes. She wanted to help them all. The house itself seemed to encourage that desire. Its design showed what was possible even when space and money were scarce. It was a philosophy, one that could change lives if only the world embraced it. She began considering how she could share that message more widely. She thought about the architect whose name was etched quietly into a wooden panel, the person whose genius had been buried by ridicule. She felt she owed him something, not payment, but justice. His creation deserved recognition and revival. His innovation deserved a future. So she began reaching out. She found his old archives, tracked down his last known associates, read interviews long forgotten. She discovered that he had passed away some years ago, never seeing his dream flourish. The news hit her like a weight, the sadness of unfulfilled legacy. But even grief awakened purpose. She made a promise then. She would become the guardian of his dream, ensuring that his work would no longer be dismissed or ignored. And strangely, opportunities seemed to form around her as if guided by the promise she had made. Universities invited her to speak about her experience. She accepted a few invitations, nervous at first, but soon found that speaking from the heart came naturally. She described how dignity should not be a luxury. She spoke about how innovation must reach those who needed it most. Young architects sat in silent awe, scribbling frantically as she explained how a home, even the smallest one, must make its owner feel valued. Television crews wanted inside her home, but she remained protective. She allowed only carefully chosen projects, ensuring that the house did not become a spectacle but a symbol. With every story told, every student inspired, she could feel the architect's legacy coming alive again, a rebirth long overdue. Her neighbors watched all of this unfold with a mixture of admiration and embarrassment. They tried to reframe their past ridicule as harmless curiosity, but their shifting attitudes revealed the truth. They had judged her too quickly, just as the world had once judged the architect. And both judgments had proven shamefully wrong. Lily didn't hold bitterness. She simply grew beyond them. When she walked through her neighborhood now, she no longer shrank beneath stares. She no longer quickened her pace to avoid being seen. Her presence filled the space she moved through. Her shoulders straightened, her steps confident. She greeted people politely, but no longer needed their validation. The house had taught her that value comes from within, not from the approval of those who see only the surface. Late one night, she stood in the loft beneath the quiet window. The sky was dark velvet, scattered with stars. She thought of all the years she felt trapped in smallness, not physically, but emotionally. How often she had believed she wasn't worthy of more. How easily others had reinforced that belief. Yet here she was, in a home that defied the very idea of limitation. She sat by the window and opened her notebook, the same one in which she had written early repair plans and sketches of the home's hidden spaces. Now, the pages were filled with new dreams, plans for workshops, collaborations with nonprofits, proposals for community housing that embraced creative design. Every line she wrote felt like a step toward undoing the injustice that had buried the architect's brilliance. A step toward ensuring that people like her, people society overlooked, could live with dignity and pride. Maybe one day, she thought, Her home wouldn't be the only one of its kind. Maybe whole neighborhoods could rise from innovations just like this, offering spaces where hope could take root in even the smallest corners. As she closed her notebook, she rested her hand on the wooden wall beside her, feeling its warmth. This place had given her more than shelter. It had given her a voice. It had given her identity. It had given her a mission. For the first time in her life, the future felt huge. She lay back on her soft pillows, the light from the hidden window casting faint silver lines across the ceiling. She breathed deeply, allowing herself to relish the peace she had earned. Beneath her, the home slept too, but it no longer felt like she was alone with the building. It felt like she and the house breathed in unison, two survivors who had found each other when the world wanted them forgotten. She smiled, eyes drifting closed, filled with the certainty she never expected to feel. $1 had bought her a key, but courage had unlocked a life. Tomorrow, she would continue building a world where no dream and no person would ever be considered too small again. Subscribe now so you never miss the next unbelievable discovery. Click to watch another shocking story, and share this video to blow your friends' minds too.